Since When Am I Faust? Chapter 11, Family Reception. There was a buzz in the air. The royal wedding had just ended and the guests were leaving the hall. Outside they found all the maids and butlers present. They lined the halls on either side and pointed, directing the guests through the castle towards the reception hall. Almost all of them had a faint smile on their face and carried a feeling of happiness that they got to play a part in this special occasion. Lined up behind them stood the royal guard. Since last time, they decided to double the security and amp up their training. The attack on Canterlot had been an embarrassing display for the royal guard, and the captain hoped to rectify that blunder. So they remained vigilant, keeping their eyes open for any threats. So far, there hadn't been any cause for alarm, but they stayed attentive all the same. From inside the wedding hall, I watched as the guests funneled out through the door. I had decided to wait until they all left. I could have run ahead, but the little nymph in my care made the ponies feel uneasy. They played it off as indifference, given the announcement made upon my embarrassing arrival. However, I could see it in their eyes, and so could the nymph. She would pull away from some of the guests as they passed and scrunched her face up as if she was tasting something sour. Looking back, I wished I could have done things a little differently. Maybe if I hadn't been so overconfident and asked for more aid, she'd be free from all of the animosity the ponies had for changelings. I wanted her to be welcome, to be free from stigma, and to simply enjoy her youth. I sighed and pulled her closer, and she looked up at me with that cute expression of hers, nuzzling my leg. I smiled and looked down at her, stroking her mane as she took comfort in being at my side. In that moment, I decided that whatever it takes, I'd make the world a better place for her and Lynn. As I gave a slight nod, settling on what I would strive for, I heard Lauren's voice speak up from the midst of my mind. She broke the silence, saying,
"I'm the same way." "What?"
I thought, as I looked up into space. The alicorn in my mind let out a stifled laugh and explained.
"I felt it, Alex. Your promise. I made that same vow to myself when I first laid eyes on Tia. I promised that whatever it took, I'd rid the world of all the remaining monsters and demons created by that longhorn twit, and that I would make it a world that she could live in peace and happiness."
A happy chirp at her hooves then brought the two of us back to reality, and I looked down at Penny. The nymph smiled at us. There was understanding in her eyes. There was a sense that she knew that whatever it took, I would always protect her. That expression of understanding was promptly replaced with confusion as Luna suddenly lifted her body into the air. She flailed around a bit, asking,
"What's the big idea?"
But when she realized that she was being put on Luna's back, Penelia became all too happy to get a ride. She took the higher elevation as an opportunity to allow her to see just a little more of the city. She spotted the city through the windows and happily chirped as she saw the buildings. Luna looked at the child with an endearing smile. Then she glanced at me, motioning with her head.
"Come on, Mother. It's time."
I nodded and followed her to the doorway. By this point, most of the guests had already left, but they were still visible in the distance. Luna and I were going to follow their lead, but something else caught our attention. Sitting there beside the door was Celestia. She was kneeling down, prodding a pony with a stick.
"Elaine? Elaine? Are you alright?"
The pony on the ground groaned, tired and worn out. She whined.
"Please stop, Princess. It's getting annoying,"
responded the pony on the floor. I gave my daughter a questioning glance, and Tia looked up at me, noticing that we were there, and she gave a playful smile.
"She's a little tired after her walk." "Walk? I was looking for you!"
Elaine cried as she flailed around on the ground.
"But I'm right here, silly." "Stop it!"
she said, swatting away the stick. It went flying through the air and hit a window, shattering it. Elaine scrunched up her muzzle as she stared wide-eyed at the damage. Suddenly, the sound of something clattering to the ground reached our ears, and it drew our attention to the broken window. We couldn't see him, but all of us heard the voice of a pony outside. He gasped and yelled out in a thick accent.
"Oh no, I just put up that window this morning."
Elaine's ears flattened, and all four of us tore our attention away from the window. We looked at each other with wide eyes, and a moment of silence hung between us. On Luna's back, Penny leaned into view. She threw her arms into the air and shouted,
"Scatter!"
At her word, we all quickly got into gear and gathered our things. Tia threw Elaine on her back and we left, scuttling away from the scene in a hurry, hoping that no pony saw us. Or, well, other than the guards and castle staff still standing at the side of the hall. While we ran past them, they all looked at the unicorn with a grin, as they were trying to hold back a laugh. A little pony blushed furiously. She was so going to get in trouble when Silver Pain found out. A few minutes later, we slowed our pace, figuring that we had put enough distance between us and the scene of the crime. We continued at a walking pace as we got further down the hall, and at about halfway to our destination, I noticed an opening in the lineup of ponies on the side of the halls. That opening led to a set of double doors, and through the glass, I could see the castle courtyard. Initially, I didn't pay it any mind and started to walk past it, thinking that we were all supposed to be at the reception as soon as possible. However, as I walked straight past the door, the sound of running hooves met my ears. I turned my head and saw Celestia running up to catch to me. She stopped beside me and draped her wing over my back. I gave her a questioning glance and she explained.
Mother, you're going the wrong way. Huh? But the reception hall is that way, isn't it?
I said, confused. Tia smiled.
Yes, it is, but we aren't going there yet. We aren't?
I asked, tilting my head. Celestia chuckled.
No, you ran out earlier before you could be told. Cadence wants us to meet in the gardens after the wedding ceremony. We're all having our pictures taken.
I nodded.
Oh, alright, but wait, why do they want me there?
To my question, Celestia rolled her eyes and bumped against my side.
Because, Mom, she wants her whole family to be there. Come on, they're waiting for us.
She then left my side and headed outside. I stood there a moment longer as she stepped out, stunned. My heart skipped a beat as I realized something that had been rather obvious. Cadence thought of me as part of her family, and I had been entirely oblivious to it. Until now, I had just thought of her as a close friend, but I was glad to consider her family. I smiled at that thought, and I headed out the door. Walking outside, I had a pause for a moment as my eyes needed to readjust to the harsh light. It took a moment, but they adjusted. Looking around, I spotted Celestia landing near the wedding party, walking in the distance. They were heading towards the gardens, and at the head of the party, I saw Cadence leaning her head on Shining as they walked along. I started following them, making my way through the courtyard, hoping to catch up. As I walked along, I noticed that some of the bricks seemed a bit loose. I almost tripped a few times and needed to catch myself from stumbling. With a groan, I looked down and followed the trail of loose bricks with my eyes. What I saw made me wince. I found myself staring at all of the destruction from that day. The area was still undergoing construction, but it was clear enough for me to remember. Near the other side, I spotted the crater. The same one I had been in when we almost lost Cadence to that mad changeling. A sickening chill washed over me as I remembered the pain I was in, and I quickly shook my head, running to catch up to the group before more traumatizing memories resurfaced. After half a minute of running, I finally caught up with the wedding party as they walked through the gardens. There was a peaceful atmosphere here, and I could hear the sounds of birds as they happily flew in and out of the hedges. We found a spot near the center where there was a fountain. The fountain flowed into a small pond, and there was a large clearing around it, and it was filled to the brim with flowers. It was a perfect location. Coming along with us was a young colt with a camera. He had an orange coat and a brown mane. He also wore a cap backwards on his head. He wanted to get the royal couple's photos first, so Shining and Cadence walked over. They stood in front of the fountain and looked into each other's eyes. A shallow smile made its way onto my face as I saw the two, yet at the same time there was a slight pang of sadness in my heart. I didn't understand at first, but a moment later an image of a tan stallion with longer hair and a beard appeared. He was a Pegasus, and he was waiting on what looked to be a wedding altar. Behind him stood a white alicorn. She had a blonde mane and a pair of red glasses. The image flashed before my eyes in an instant, and it disappeared just as fast. Another snippet of Faust's memories. It was quick, but the damage was already done. The image brought with it a sense of sadness to her heart. On the outside, I was smiling happily. However, if one were paying more attention, they would notice the subtle difference in me as my breathing became shaky. Centuries of emotion held firmly in our heart came crashing down on me, and I fought to hold myself together. At the same time, Lauren was doing her best to keep her emotions at bay. However, as much as she could suppress them, they still lingered, and the effects were enough that I found it difficult to hold back from breaking into tears. Although I found that difficult, I somehow managed to hold myself together. I breathed out slowly in an attempt to calm myself. Once our little episode had passed, I tilted up my head and asked my passenger,
What was that?
when it comes to a setting that feels so familiar, or just is, that is tough to ignore. Sometimes they're nice memories, and that's great. But sadly, there are the bad ones. Anywho, let's get on to our memorable donators. Top donators are 630, J Tinman, Only One Thing, Ceru, Orion, and IronSky. Darkside, Rayden, Narwhals, Blackmoonheart, Pastel Skies, Austin, Rolan, Stu Hex, Sword Brother and Mordred, Omicron, Lyrae, Will, Chris, Twinkie, Ridesaw, Badass Waffle, Shadow Moon, Luigi88, and many more beautiful people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.